You've been home for a couple of years now, buddy, but you're still fighting the war.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Season 2 of Shoulder to Shoulder. I am one of the co-founders of Grumpy Combat Veteran and Friends Media, Will Selber. Kate Kay, unfortunately, cannot join us today. She is busy fighting the good fight inside the VA. God bless her for doing that. But we're starting off Season 2 with an all-star guest who really needs no introduction, but I'm going to try to do it anyways. Lieutenant Colonel Scott Mann is a retired Green Beret officer with over 20 years of experience. He's written a lot of books, Operation Pineapple Express, and his newest book, Nobody's Coming to Save You. And he's also in charge of the Hero's Journey, which I participated in. And he has a lot of experience in Afghanistan and in the regular warfare that we will also jump into. Scott, welcome to Shoulder to Shoulder.
Thanks, man. It's really good to be on with you. I love your podcast, and I love the title, and I love just everything you guys are doing. I think it's a really cool platform, and honestly, I think there's so much room for where you guys are going. Like, it's just neat to see the evolution, and even since you and I talked months ago in Topeka. So thanks for having me on, and it really is humbling to be here.
Well, I appreciate it, man. So why don't we just start off with your newest book, Nobody is Coming to Save You. What's your book about? I think it's a little bit different from your previous two books.
Yeah, it really is. Thanks. Honestly, the subtitle is a Green Beret's Guide to Getting Big Shit Done. Honestly,
yeah, I love it.
Those are kind of it's kind of the 1-2 punch. I just think it's where we are in the world. Nobody's coming to save you, but you can still get big stuff done. And I learned that. I don't have the market cornered on it, but I did learn it as a Green Beret, that from some very great NCOs, that when you are out in the middle of what I call the churn. Mm-hmm. And, life's throwing everything at you, and there's division and disconnection, which is by definition kind of what Green Berets do. You can still achieve strategic effects. It's just you've got to kind of come at it differently, and your level of self-reliance and agency has to be at the highest, mm-hmm. and you have to have, I think, a really deep sense of human connection skills. Those are the two things that I really, purpose and human connection are at the epicenter of getting big stuff done in these times that we live in. And I think that what you and I experienced mm-hmm. in Afghanistan, in these trust depleted places, good, bad, or indifferent, has made its way to our country now. And we are very much in our own churn. And that's what this book is about. It's just helping, self-actualizing leaders get more done through deeper human connections.
Yeah, I mean, I love you can read about it on his website, scottmann.com, but, I love what you have here. The enemy is not who you think. It's not politicians you hate, the partner sitting across from you, that school friend who blocked you on Facebook, that football dad or PTA mom who annoys you. It's not even the driver who cut you off on your way home. You're looking in the wrong place. The enemy is the churn. It's chaos with a capital C. I was hoping maybe you could kind of unpack that for us.
Yeah, happy to, because I do believe in every word of that. And I thought very carefully about every word chosen for that. And honestly, there is, I believe, in our country right now, a unique and novel set of social circumstances that stand between us and our goals, mm-hmm. that it's just unprecedented. And I call it the 4Ds, mm-hmm. but it is distraction, mm-hmm. Disengagement or absence mm-hmm. of purpose, disconnection from ourselves and from the natural world, and distrust at an epic level. Yeah. And all of those things conspire to form this social environment where it's very easy to slip into a fear-based or anger-based trance as you navigate the world. And then when you add these dopamine dispensers to it and the 24/7 news cycle, it is a ready-made petri dish for what I call shadow tribalism, which is a form of tribalism. It's the negative side of tribalism, which is feud and shame and division and distrust, all of that stuff that goes with, tribal behavior against one tribe against another, or an in-group against an out-group. But we don't even realize we're doing it. We're in a trance state with our heads down in our phones or watching the next Fox News alert or CNN update. And that is the enemy. And I believe that if we can call that out, become familiar with that, give it a grammar, a language to recognize it, we can save a lot of relationships, a lot of friendships, and frankly, reclaim our own agency as we lead through these tough times.
Yeah, that dopamine hit that everybody gets off their phone, and the social media, and then the hyper partisan times that we live in.
Yeah.
It's my first election as a veteran. I've
Huh. Yeah.
experienced it as an active duty member, but it's just I have been really just shocked at just how much there's tension even between veterans and people
Yeah.
that you used to be friends with and stuff like that. And it's just like you said, this shadow tribalism, and it's just really astounding to me as somebody who's like, I've just come out and I'm kind of,
Yeah.
hey, look at the world around me, and it's like a
Right.
different country for me now.
Yeah.
It doesn't. This is a different country that it was when I joined the military 20 years ago.
It's so well said, Will. It was how I felt in 2013. Honestly, it was the first thing that set me on a spiral that ended up with me standing in a closet holding a pistol.
Yeah.
And I, it's still a very uncomfortable topic for me, but I talk about it openly more, and I try to unpack it. I try to understand what took me to that depth of, depression and just mental disconnection. And very much like you, when I left the military in 2013, I came home to a country I didn't recognize anymore. And there was, it's far worse now, but even then there was so much division in the country. It was that churn of people just tearing each other apart. And I think Sebastian Junger has framed it better than anybody when he says that most combat veterans are more than willing to die for their country. They just don't know how to live for it.
Yes.
Because it's hard to know how to live for a country that's tearing itself apart along every imaginable line, from race to economics to politics. And he goes on to say that, we're treating our neighbors with contempt normally reserved for one's enemies. Contempt normally reserved for one's enemies. And that, to me, frames out the churn better than anything out there. And I think speaks to what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm in violent agreement. As somebody who's navigated his own severe mental health problems, specifically from our retreat from Afghanistan, I have struggled to try to communicate that with civilians. Just last night, I was with Lieutenant General Sami Sadat. He was doing a book tour here in Austin, and the level of a kind of space between the people who were in the audience trying to figure out what Afghanistan was, and like just didn't understand what the war was about. And I know, talking to my veteran friends, they come out, they spend their entire life fighting this war, and then they come out and people are like, they don't know what happened. It seems like they don't care. And if you try to assert some ideas in it, you're usually met with a punch, right? Because people feel like you're attacking them or their tribe, when what you're really trying to do is explain the problems that a lot of combat veterans feel.
I watched you tell your story in Topeka, and I've been around storytelling a lot, right? I mean, it's what I do, and I watched you tell your story, and I'm still to this day struck by not just your story of what you went through, after the collapse, but just watching your body as you worked through that story. And one of the, it was just, for me, it was amazing to see, humbling to see. But I guess what I'm trying to tell you is that I see this all the time. I see, when we did our play Last Out, we toured with Gary Sinise right after the war ended. And Gary and I both felt strongly that there was going to be a visceral reaction in the veteran community, and there was going to be a collective turning of the page in the civilian community. And so we thought, we've really got to get this play out again. So we put the band back together and we toured. And Will, I will tell you, we toured for, a year. And in the talkbacks after every show, I saw what you're talking about. I saw that that dissonance between those that lived it and those that, saw it in news bites and seemed somewhat annoyed by it over 20 years. And, all I know is that we cannot allow that to stand.
Yes.
Like that cannot stand. And I like to think that podcasts like yours and maybe the work that some of us are doing in the nonprofit space with storytelling can help us, because if we turn the page on this thing, not only does it inflict a deeper moral injury like it did with our Vietnam brothers, but this one followed us home. I mean, you and I were talking before the show started about Siraj Haqqani and his ilk. I mean, if we just blindly turn the page on what was a 20-year war and ignore the threats that are reemerging from that land, we do so at our peril. And I believe it is your generation and my generation of veterans who are best suited to ensure that we don't do that. But boy, is it hard when you see what you saw with Sammy. It can be very demoralizing.
It is. It's it is a something that I spend a lot of time doing, trying to kind of bridge that Civ Mill gap. That's kind of what we do here, and it's tragic. One of the things that when I was transitioning out of the military, I was sitting in TAP, doing the whole thing with a bunch of other people, and I was struck by some of the words that the person said. It was, "This is the hardest thing that you're going to do. Veterans struggle. You have to kind of, try to be, transition into a new world." And, one of the things that I would love your opinion on, I don't know if that's the right way to come about things. I feel like we're setting up our veterans the wrong way, because I think it takes two to tango here, and that the civilians also have to meet their veterans halfway. Instead of us being responsible for transitioning, it should be meeting and being like, what happened? Because it's just so hard for veterans coming out to try to explain themselves to people that have no understanding of it.
Right. Yeah. And especially, and I don't want to minimize those that are coming out like, post Afghanistan, but certainly in combat. Coming out of combat is such a difficult thing to explain, even to your family, right?
Yes.
And then much less to the civilian population. But I agree with you, and I also believe that if you look at the churn that you and I started this conversation with, we are at an unprecedented level of danger in this country right now. I mean, honestly, the way we're treating each other with that level of contempt, it's extremely concerning. As the chopper flies right over my house. That's not weird.
No worries, man.
But it is very, very incumbent on us to figure out how to treat each other. And I believe veterans represent our last best hope, or the military community, of leading us into better days, and to really model what that looks like. So I guess what I'm saying is veterans and their families have they're a national treasure. Like, they really have a capability. They've lived through the churn. They know how to lead through it. They know how to bridge across in-groups and out-groups. And I'm not saying they have all the answers, because we've certainly been scuffed up. Yeah. But one of the things that a buddy of mine, he did a research paper on transition. And it was a finding that kind of surprised him. But when you hear it, it makes sense. He said that in his dissertation, the thing he really focused on was that for transition to really work, is what veterans need is neighbors who connect with them, who listen without judgment to their stories, and then walk that path to healing and integration at their shoulder.
Yeah.
That's what we need.
I'm sure you've experienced the same thing when you're talking with civilians, and they kind of ask you questions about the war. And I tell them, like, which version do you want? Do you want the PG version, or do you want the R-rated version? Right. I have kind of stepped on landmines, because I've kind of misread the room, and have told maybe stories that were a little bit uncomfortable for people. I want to kind of talk about your play. I haven't seen it, but what was the impetus behind that, and how did you go about doing it?
What you've just said. I mean, honestly, you just set it up perfectly. I mean, that was it. That was it for me. So, but the, kind of the origin of it, and I do want to get you to it, because I think it would really, I think you would really enjoy it. But two, I would love for you to, when we bring it, maybe we can get it back in your neck of the woods. I would love for you to bring some civilian neighbors.
Sure.
Because that's where it has the most impact. But to get back to the question, it was in 2015 or 16, and my son told me he was joining the Army. and the war in Afghanistan was still going. And I thought, yeah, my kid is going to go fight a war that I didn't finish, and the world doesn't even know that we're still there. And that just terrified me. I was already out of the military. And it also, I looked at the division in the country and I just thought, man, this is really awful. I was going through acting classes as a speaker, as a storyteller, right? I was taking just to help with the physicality and how to present better. And one of my acting coaches gave us an assignment to write a play, a 5-minute one-person show about any totem that we wanted. And I chose a silly band that my son had given me. We called it the Magic Silly Band when he was a little guy. And I wore it to Afghanistan, and I told the story as that silly band and all the things that I saw as the silly band. And it really connected with the audience in a way that my speaking hadn't, in a way that my writing hadn't. And Jason, my coach, he said, man, that's a play. And so he had me working it partial for healing, partial for possibly one day it might. I never thought it would see the light of day. But then Monty, my wife, got involved. And so here's the bottom line about the play. The play is basically It's a Wonderful Life with body armor. It's a composite character named Master Sergeant Danny Patton. And he's based on 3 team sergeants that didn't make it home. And Danny is mortally wounded in the first scene in Afghanistan. And he is trying to ascend to Valhalla. But he's stuck. He's stuck between his living room and his fire base. That's his purgatory. And so his best friend, Kenny, who was killed on 9/11, comes down from Valhalla along with several other operators. And they are all operators who were killed in different wars. And they become the people in Danny's life that made his heart pump the most blood. They become his wife, Lynn, his son, Caden, Colonel Smith, who he can't stand, Malik John, the elder, who started as his enemy and became his mentor, Saeed Wali, his arch enemy in the Taliban. They become all these people. And they take Danny through his life from the time he joined Special Forces, went to selection, the Q course, got married, had a son, 9/11, and then deployment after deployment. As the rails start to come off and Danny starts to figure out what he's holding on to and ultimately lets go and knows peace. And that is the story. And in doing that, the audience goes for the full ride. So that thing about civilians having that dissonance that they did in Sammy's room, that ain't happening in our room. Because they're literally weeping, and the veterans, it's kind of neat. Like the Gold Star family members, because it's a story about a Gold Star family. So normally your Gold Star family members are like, they're beaming from ear to ear because that's their son, that's their story, and they got to put it on display for the world. And the veterans are usually like, they're emotional, but they're like, that's me, That's it. It's the civilians who are wrecked. And then we do a talk back. We do a talk back after every show. The actors come out, they sit the blocks down, and then we guide a discussion with the veterans and the civilians in the audience. And Afghans. We've brought Afghans to the play.
Awesome.
So it is our platform, Will, that we're continuing to evolve. And I'm excited to say that we're standing it up for 2025 right now.
Sweet.
And for the first time, I'm not in it. It's a brand new cast. I'm not in it. I'm the executive producer. But it's all veterans and military family members in the cast. Wonderful. And I think people are going to love it.
Well, you'll have to share the schedule for us.
Yeah, I will. But good. I will say lastoutplay.com if anybody's interested. Lastoutplay.com.
I'll put it on the show notes.
Perfect.
Yeah, man. Wow, that is, it reminds me of a book that I read, A Theater of War, and like that whole kind of effort where some actors, Theater of War, they do like Greek tragedies and stuff like that. You have to make it digestible for people and provide an environment where civilians can learn and also veterans can be there. And if you have a veteran go, that's it right there. That's what I'm talking about. I think that's the magic moment, right? Because they feel heard and the civilians learn something, and then you can have that dialogue between them.
That's the secret sauce, man. And this is our 3rd touring season.
Okay.
I actually write. That's one of the stories I tell in Nobody's Coming to Save You. And the reason that I do that is because that play, has been. It's our 3rd touring season. We made a low budget film that's on Amazon Prime during COVID.
Mm-hmm.
It's been covered by Tom Brokaw and CBS Morning News. It's Gary Sinise sponsored it. But what people don't realize is that play started with a silly band, and it started with I'd never acted in my life. I've never written a play in my life.
Right.
You know, you're talking about a midlife crisis. And when we first toured the play, we went to 16 cities across the country.
Wow.
We put 28,000 miles on a U-Haul van. We traveled with our own counselors. Bonnie and I usually wrote the checks out of our own pocket when the host couldn't cover the nut. And but you know what, man? Over time, it became something really special. And that is my point in the book, is that everything that happened from that was deeply ingrained in purpose and human connection.
Yeah.
And that's it. And the story. And that's not unique to me. That's not unique to special forces or veterans. That is available to all of us.
Yes.
If we're willing to run those miles.
Yes. And I think, it kind of ties back with your book. I mean, we have lost that human connection to talk to one another and to share our stories. And, storytelling is incredibly important. It's the way that we really understand one another. And, that's a good segue to kind of the hero's journey, which I was lucky enough to take part in this past summer in Topeka, Kansas. And I'll be honest with you, Scott, it was one of the most healing things I've done in a while. For those, if you could just kind of explain it a little bit, like how it started and what it's all about. It's just an incredible thing.
Thank you. So it started for me in that closet holding a 45, honestly, in 2015 when I was at the bottom of the barrel and I was not able to go through with it. And thank God. And I emerged in that kind of Danny Patton purgatory. You know what I mean? I was in between my living room and my fire base, and I just didn't see any way out. And a friend of mine recommended a story coach named Bo, who lived out in California. He was a former NFL player. And he had blown his knee out, 7 injuries, and had become an actor and a speaker and a story coach. And the guy said, you need to go work with him. So I did. At this point, I was like, what do I have to lose? And the guy, Bo, ended up being such a change in my life. He showed me, this guy was an amazing storyteller. Will, he could walk out on the stage, and before he even spoke, everyone was dialed into him as if he were prowling that stage like an operator is what he looked like. And I knew right then, I'm like, that's what I'm going to do. And he was kind enough to train me for 2 years. He just poured himself into me.
Wow. The
physicality, the breath work, the design and the delivery of storytelling, the tribal and primal aspects of storytelling, using breath to bring yourself into a parasympathetic state, all those things, all that work that you did in Topeka to metabolize the emotion and the trauma and put it into a narrative that you could share generously with others. Like, that's the work. And so he showed me how to do that. He showed me that there's actually a craft for doing that. And that, man, it saved my life. It didn't change. It saved my life, because then I thought, well, shit, I can show this to other people. I can show this to other veterans, first responders, Gold Star family members. And so Monty, my wife, and I, we founded a nonprofit called The Hero's Journey. And for the last, 5 years, not only have we done the play, but we do these storytelling workshops where we travel around the country and we work with veterans and we work with first responders and Gold Star families, families of the fallen, actually, not just Gold Stars, to tell their story, to find their voice and tell their story. Because the truth is, story is a sense-making tool. And stories help us make sense of trauma. They help us make sense of deep loss, but they also help civilians make sense of something they don't understand. And we can bridge that gap with our narratives if we train. But we have to train. Otherwise, you feel that frustration feeling that you described. Sure. And because you don't know what to do with the emotions, you need the narrative competence, as I call it, to take those deep-seated emotional lessons and parlay them into a narrative that lands on the brain of the listener and they make sense of it. And that the only form that can do that is storytelling. So that's what we do. I will say this real quick is we've made the decision that we're going to rebrand our nonprofit into Task Force Pineapple, just because there's more recognizability there.
Sure.
But our storytelling program will remain, and it will always be the Hero's Journey storytelling program.
Yeah. So I went this summer, and I didn't know what to expect. For our listeners, it's like an all-day event. Scott's there, Gold Star Mother's there, and you kind of start to learn how to share that story, whatever it is. Goes through different iterations, trying to practice it. And Scott and his crack team, provide some mentorship and some lessons. And then by the end of the day, I was sitting around a circle with a bunch of people that I had just met, and they were sharing some just unbelievable stories. And it was not just combat veterans. I thought some of the most impressive ones were family members, military members, people whose brothers or sisters had died by suicide. And it's just for me, I learned just how much, war impacts. And it's just not me that's impacted by it. It's, Steve and his wife, Rosie, who we had on the show, the Vietnam tunnel rat. And it was an incredible thing. And it was healing because I was able for the first time to really share my story about what the fall of Afghanistan really did to me and what it did to my family, and it's priceless. I mean, it's just a priceless thing.
And I would also say that I'm like you. I'm always astounded by the depth and breadth of humanity in storytelling. And, what storytelling also gives us is shared perspective, which no other form of communication can really give us. There's a reason it's 70,000 years old. But, even as much as I thought I knew about you, I knew nothing until I heard your story. I knew nothing about you, right? But then when I heard your story, in a lot of ways, I knew everything about you that was really important. And that is what I call the generosity of scars, when we are willing to repurpose our struggles in the service of other people. And that's the thing where a lot of guys and girls have a problem as veterans with storytelling right out of the gate, is like, well, I don't want to talk about myself. And I get the whole quiet professional thing. I understand. But I also believe there's a difference between being a quiet professional and a silent professional. Storytelling at the most biological level, Will, is designed for the audience, not the teller. Stories have been around for 70,000 years. So if I walk in the room 10,000 years ago or around the campfire and I say, let me tell you why saber-toothed tigers make crappy pets, that story is told in the service of the listener, because the listener's like, because they are autobiographically processing my ass whooping and making sense of their own life so that it doesn't happen to them, but they feel as if they lived it. It's called autobiographical listening. And when you told your story, I mean, it moved my wife. Like, it crushed her because it reminded her of what she and I had been through, and it just accelerated the trust that we had with you. And that's the point. The work is difficult in storytelling when you repurpose your struggles and your scars in the service of others. But the return on investment is accelerated trust, relatability, and a bridging capability that no other form of communication will give you. And I'm not suggesting that you go out there and have dumping sessions,
Sure.
But I am suggesting that the stuff that scuffed us up as veterans has immense social value in this time of churn, and storytelling is the medium by which to bring that out and make yourself relevant.
Yeah, I'm in violent agreement again. I spread the word about it through my friends, and one of the things that I was actually this last weekend, I was chatting with an old lieutenant of mine who had just gotten back from his first deployment. And, he was going through the usual, like, I'm having a hard time. I just came back, and I'm with my wife, but it's just different. Something's off. And I was like, well, you need to let's talk about like what happened and repurpose this into your story of the deployment. And, what he said to me, is a common thing that I hear is like, well, I wasn't in any combat. I wasn't in Iraq and Afghanistan like you guys were. And I told him, I said, hey, man, like where you were at, you were calling in airstrikes on people. You were killing them. And like the idea that just because you're not on the front lines doesn't mean that you don't have a story to tell is another, for me, that I've heard is this other like barrier. It's like, but I'm just a this, but I'm just a that,
Yeah. That's right, man. That's a really good point. Like, so Stephen Pressfield in his book, The War of Art, which is I strongly recommend to anybody that is in transition or wants to be even explore being a creative, starting your own business. It's an amazing book. And one of the things that Steve talks about is the self-sabotage that we all undergo. It's very normal. He calls it resistance, just like I call the social conditions the churn. He calls the internal churn resistance. And it's in all of us. And resistance shows up in very common ways with storytelling. One of them is, I don't have a story. The other is, my story's not as good as, or nobody wants to hear my story. Those are the things that they're most dangerous because they cheat us out of your lived experience. I mean, like, imagine if I hadn't heard your story. What a real that would have been. Like, what if you had opted to share something else, right? And the reality is, like, we wouldn't have, I think, the connection that we have.
Sure.
The larger point here, though, that you're making is that it is very easy to look at oneself and say, well, I didn't do this. And I think as veterans, we need to clock that too. And it's a very dangerous game when we start qualifying, levels of service, because the reality is, what's personal is universal. If it's personal to you and you went through it and you struggled as a result of it, then that's your friggin' struggle. No one gets to judge that or decide that struggle is not worthy of this. I mean, that's just not how it works, particularly if it was something that you're sharing in the service of others. Now, if you're sharing it from a victimhood perspective, okay, maybe. But like, I have a son who serves in peacetime. And quote unquote peacetime, but he has his own struggles, right? He has his own things that he goes through, and they're very personal to him. And the last thing in the world I should ever do, or anyone should ever do who was in combat, is judge that. I'll tell you another area where I think we've got to think about this too is on the military family side.
Yes,
we have family members who are in the military who divorced. We have families who have lost fallen loved ones to suicide and to cancer. Is their death any less related to service than someone who fell by an enemy's bullet? I mean, I don't know that that's for us to answer. I think it's more about embracing anybody's journey. And I don't want to sound all kumbaya here, but struggle is the essential element of a story. It is no struggle, no story. And to be judgmental of yours or anybody else's struggle is a dangerous game, and honestly, a fool's errand. So I would encourage people, if you are telling yourself, well, my story's not as good, because that's probably the very one you need to tell.
Yes, 100%. There's only one guy who pulled the trigger on bin Laden, and everybody else is all the way back here. And I always say that to people. I'm like, man, like, you're getting on a plane and you're going somewhere. You have no idea where you're going to go. You have no idea what's going to happen. You have no idea what the situation is going to be. I don't care if it's Afghanistan, Ukraine, Al Udeid. I don't care really. It all takes courage. And
sure.
I always try to tell all of my active duty brothers and sisters that you should be proud of whatever you do, because it takes something courageous to do that, to sign on the dotted line. I want to kind of talk a little bit about, your decision to retire. I've read a little bit about it, and I feel like a lot of connection with you about it, because I think we come from the same place. I know that it was a little bit of, for me, I'll just say, for me, it was deep disillusionment. I had an opportunity for War College. I was 05, like you, trying to pave the path to righteousness. And something had changed, and I just couldn't be a part of it anymore. And I think that I'm not the only one who felt that way. And I just want to know if you could talk a little bit about your own decision.
No, I appreciate that. And I remember you saying that. And I did feel a deep connection to you on that, because you don't come across that a lot. For me, and this is, it was just my journey, but we did this program called Village Stability Operations in 2010 that was very focused on local engagement and working with not just tribes, but with local communities of all ethnicities, not just Pashtuns. And I was very involved in that. I was from Jump Street. I was super involved in that and had a big role in the recruiting of the folks who initially were very skeptical to do this. And I recruited a lot of Afghan community leaders to participate in this program with assurances that Special Forces and others would stay with them for the long haul, that this was a multi-decade endeavor. I'd been given my own assurances that that's what we were doing. And then lo and behold, 2013, 2012, really, we started bailing on these villages, and we started shutting the program down and changing it dramatically and turning it into more of a militia type program. And almost every single person that I recruited was killed by the Taliban. And it's a big underlying plot in Last Out. That's what Danny actually experiences. So there is some autobiographical stuff in there. But for me, Will, that was the point where I thought, okay, it was foreshadowing for me for what was going to happen in Afghanistan. If we're willing to walk on those kinds of promises, I just couldn't be part of that. I couldn't. I had just been selected for battalion command. In fact, I turned down 3 in a row, battalion commands, and went to Afghanistan for one more tour for VSO. Got a command when I got back and turned it down, and they said, "Okay, Skippy, that's 3. That's prejudice. You're not gonna get promoted." And I prayed about it, talked to my wife about it, and made the decision that I could do more on the outside than the inside. The other kind of culminating thing was the way they treated Jim Gant.
Yes.
And took his beret and took his tab. And I just couldn't be part of that anymore. I couldn't be part of that community. I loved that community. I loved my time in it, but I knew that it had come to an end, and that there was something for me on the outside that I needed to do. And so that was my decision. And I tell you, I look back on it and I don't regret it a bit. And there are still to this day general officers who will not talk to me. Particularly after the Afghanistan withdrawal.
Yes.
Because I've been very public about my position on career senior officers. Not all of them, but a lot of them. And, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. I am completely all right with that. And I'm in a much better place in my life as a result of that decision I made in 2013.
Yeah, I as somebody did VSO as well, not a Green Beret, but I was I was an Afghan hand, and was with a team from 7th Group doing VSO in 2012, and I saw that firsthand. The disparity of different, I was up in Kunduz for a while. Wow. The ALP program was different than the one that I was in Gorak. It was just completely different. And when I saw it, I was very, very alarmed. And then my last year in Afghanistan, inside the embassy, watching us prepare to leave and telling our Afghan allies that we were going to stay. And one of the things that I did, is that before I left, I started writing letters, letters to all my guys. And I was like, here. And I snuck into my boss's office and took his stamp and stamped all the letters, that said Defense Attaché Office, and gave them to everybody because I could see this coming. It was obvious. So obvious. And, I remember speaking with some of my friends about it, and they were like, "Boy, you better watch out, man." I was like, you know what? If this is what I'm going to get in trouble for, I'm totally fine with that. And that's just the way it goes, and I came out of that and I went into squadron command, the same as battalion command. And then, Afghanistan happened. And for me, it was beyond heartbreaking. It was beyond a moral injury. I felt used. And, I had felt like I had been trained by my government to become an Afghan expert and to really communicate. I can speak some Pashto, a little bit of Dari, and to really communicate with my Afghan brothers and sisters. And then to have the rug pulled out like that. Yeah. And it was up to guys and gals like me and you to try to get these Afghans out. And it was, people don't, still to this day, when I talk about this stuff, like getting our Afghan brothers out, there is still the majority of the population that has no idea about that, and it's still an underreported story, even after the book you wrote, Operation Pineapple Express.
It is, man, and you're right, and we need to keep going. I think we need to keep telling the story. We need to find new mediums, new ways to do it, and help people get ready to listen to what we have to say on this, because it is so, so important. Monty asked me in the middle of all this, why are you doing this? Our business almost went under. We lost all our clients. And look, I'm not complaining. I'm simply saying there was an impact at every turn. I mean, the people that got involved in this didn't want to get involved in this. I'd been out of the game for 10 years. I'm a playwright. We were getting ready to roll our film out. Like, I'm not exactly a top tier choice for rescue, but like you, I felt that just being kind of used and like there's no way I can't live with this. I'm going to end up in that closet again if I don't do this. And I told Monty, I said, our boys are watching us right now.
Yes.
Our 3 sons are watching everything we do right now. Across the country, our children are watching what we do. And I don't think it is an accident at all, Will, that there's been a dramatic drop in recruiting and retention, particularly around the legacy force, because all those kids saw what their parents went through. And they thought, nope, not right now, not doing that.
Yes. It's and I share your frustration with many senior general officers, not all of them, but a lot. It's the silence is deafening. It is just
sir.
Hey, where is the outreach to be like, what happened was wrong. And we own that. And these are the steps that we can take to try to make it right. It is like this wall of silence. And I remember being, a squadron commander at the time, and I felt like I was the only one. I went to this conference at Air University, and I did this presentation called "We Lost the War in Afghanistan, and Our Conduct is Mired in Shame." And I went step by step on the things that we did.
Wow.
And I'll be honest with you, I got quite a bit of kudos, but it wasn't out in public. It was off to the side,
under the table.
And I was so frustrated. I'm like, I'm a nobody, man. I'm just another lieutenant colonel, and another squadron. There's tons of them out there. Why is it up to me and some other people to talk about this? And it's just so frustrating because I know tons, and I know you do too, of people in active duty that still struggle with this today.
Yes. I mean, the suicide rates have gone up, the self-medicating. I mean, there's still active duty members who are still paying for safe houses.
Yes.
The fact that that's actually happening. Our mutual friend Jason Houck wrote an article in the Pinehurst Dispatch called America's Generals Are AWOL that I think is one of the finest pieces written post-withdrawal. I would encourage everybody to go read that. I mean, it is so well done and timeless and thoughtful. Honestly, he wasn't bomb throwing. It was just honest dialogue about, look, we put our faith in these senior officers and politicians and diplomats for decades. And where are they now? Like, where are you? Where is your voice? And it's deafening. And then when they do speak, it's tone deaf. So I think that, and I hope you and I get another chance to do this again, maybe even just on that. But I do think there is a ton of work still to be done. I know that's one reason we rebranded Pineapple. And I know, look, we were just one group out of many, but I do believe that we have an inherent obligation to advocate for not just our Afghan allies, but the generation of warfighters and families that stood at their shoulder. And if we don't, not only are we going to lose them, but something's going to happen here at home that is going to make 9/11 look like a dress rehearsal. And so I'm committing the rest of my life to it, and I mean it, and putting my voice out there. Every bit of my craft, my storytelling, my play, all of this is singularly focused, on helping Americans have better connections and things like that. But the duality is to try to set this right so that our kids don't inherit this problem set any more than they already have.
We could go probably 5 episodes on just the withdrawal and the retreat, but I think there's a lot of listeners out there who are still involved. I'm still involved, right? I have an interpreter who reached out to me. I'd totally forgotten about him, right? And because life finds a way, right? I mean, it's one of the things that I have learned is that I had so many interpreters after 4 deployments in Afghanistan that they find a way. And I think one of the things that you've been doing is trying to bridge that gap and to provide a mechanism for veterans who are crushed by Afghanistan to share their story, because people who can really explain it. It's not going to. I would love to have general officers out there beating the drum, but they have not done it, and so it's up to, unfortunately, Ed, again, to us to like talk about this, and nobody wants to, but it's because it's so painful. It's incredibly important.
It is. And there is, and you're bringing up something really important here, is that there's a way to do it. It's unfortunate that this is once again on the shoulders of our veterans and our military families. They've been through enough.
Yes.
But they understand that there is inherently a need to do it. But there is a way to do it, as you saw, where it still hurts, but it's safer. And you can put your story out into the world in the service of others, and you can find your own healing while simultaneously helping other people make sense of what happened. And that's the promise. And it's not easy, but I will tell you, with our workshops, if you reach out to us and come to one of those, we're also going to put out, we're going to put out a digital version where you can study storytelling at your home. And, you don't even have to come to a workshop, but it can help you safely put your story together and share it, not just for yourself, but the country needs to hear it, man. We cannot collectively turn the page like this thing was a ServPro commercial that never even happened. We cannot do that. And I'm not going to allow it. And I know you're not. And, but we've got to do it though. We can't just shout to the heavens because we sound shrill.
Sure.
And so we got to train. Yep. And honestly, I'll bring it back to the book. Nobody's coming to save you. There's a ton in that book that if you're working Afghan evacuation, if you're working Afghan advocacy or soldier advocacy, there is a ton in there for nonprofits, for advocates to sink their teeth into.
Yeah. Well, Scott, I really appreciate you coming on, taking the time out.
Of course.
We're going to get you back on there. We can talk about so much different stuff. Everybody go out and buy Nobody's Coming to Save You, a Green Beret's Guide to Getting Shit Done, or Getting Big Shit Done, excuse me. And, if you have the opportunity to go see one of Scott's plays or participate in the workshop, I can't, recommend it highly enough. I really thank you, Scott. For me, like I read the very first book about local forces.
Like Game Changers?
Yeah, man. Yeah. And Game Changers. And it's the reason why I got into VSO. And I just want to thank you for all that you've done, you and your wife and all your organizations have done for America's combat veterans. And I'll give you the last word.
Thank you, man. No, I think I'll leave it with you. I'm honored to have done it, and our work is still not done. And I really do believe that we are coming into these waters of churn are going to test us more than we've ever been tested here at home. And it's going to be our military community that will lead us into better days. But to do that, we've really got to take care of each other, and we've really got to find the ways to tell our story. Without that, we're lost. And so our stories and our narrative competence are what will guide us into those better days. And I encourage everybody to dig into that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And to all our listeners, thank you for listening. Give us a good review. Share it with your friends. Share it with your enemies. We need to get the word out. And thank you once again. And until next time.
Bye, everybody.